Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching. Hello, everyone. We are looking at the next prompt in the third section of our guided journal, Coaching Nuggets of Wisdom to Inspire, Explore, Act, Flourish, a guided journal to live your best life. We are in the Act section, so we're really focusing on taking intentional, inspired action. And before that, we did Inspire, and we also looked at Explore. And they are connected, in kind of how we approach things in life. Often we're inspired. We may want to get curious about something and explore it, and then take action. So that is the theme or the course that we're taking in this journal. And today's prompt is about values. So I'm going to read the prompt, and then as usual, we will talk about what comes up for us and see where the conversation takes us. I will begin reading the prompt now. Recognize and reflect on where your values show up in your life. Rooting into your values can bring hope. Understanding your values can help you live the life you want and are designed to enjoy. What are your top 3 to 5 values? What do you want to change about how you spend your time and or how you show up authentically to live out your values? Now, vision yourself living your next day fully in your values. What does that look like for you? How do your values help you flourish? So what's coming up for me as I'm reading this prompt? One thing is, where values, the role of values and how values can guide us. So I see values in my life as a kind of a North Star or a way to navigate life. One thing that comes up for me is in my work as an executive director and the decisions that I need to make day to day and how these decisions come up. And when the opportunity arises for me to make decisions, and there's so many different types of decisions, from operational to policy to something as simple as what to order for a program or something like that. Especially when I'm responding to disputes or conflict, I often return to my values. What is my goal and my intention for the organization and my vision for the organization as executive director? So I return to my values a lot, and not just my own personal values, because I think it's really important to show up authentically and sincerely as a leader, even if it might be received in a way that is unpleasant or that people might disagree with the way that I move or the decisions I make. But for me, I personally am basing the success of the decisions that I make. I base it on 2 things. One, whether or not it's aligned with the values of the organization, the mission and the vision of the organization, and also whether or not it aligns with my values, so that if I need to defend a decision that I make, I can do so in a way that makes sense to me and that also allows me to show up with integrity and authenticity. So that's really important to me. So values come up a lot in that. What really stuck out for me was the second sentence: understanding your values can help you live the life you want and are designed to enjoy. And I'm thinking about that word design. It really gave me pause. So there is something about our values that reflects the essence of who we are. And when I think about the word designed, there seems behind that design, there's agency behind that word. There's intention behind that word. And so that word in itself really stuck out for me. I'm like, that's a very interesting word to use. Not deserve or, excuse me, it's not that you deserve or that you desire. It's designed. And I think that reflects what values tell us. What is the information that values give us about ourselves, about how we show up, and what matters to us, what's meaningful for us. So that was something, that second sentence really stuck out to me. And I'm still formulating an idea of what that means. But the things that come up for me with that are intention, agency, almost like a creator. Because when I think of design, I think of a creator. So there is something bigger implied in that word. So those are the things initially that are coming up for me. Eryn, what's coming up for you?
I love that you point out the word designed here, because for me, that gives us humans a way to maybe take some pressure off of how we live out our values to enjoy the life we are designed. It's like, I think there's so much goodness in that design, or there's so much, like you said, intention, that just being able to be, because we're designed that way, right? We can enjoy. Whereas an older philosophy I would have been more around like forcing myself to find a way to joy, and joy would have had, I think, so much more pressure in this prompt for me, 5 years ago. But really, using that design and enjoy next to each other, for me, it gives me a little bit of like, okay, I can just remember my values and root into those and use those and live those, and I'll have the freedom to enjoy my life. Now, it's not that simple, but it's what really, really stuck out to me there as you were talking about that. And then the other thing that really stuck out to me as you were speaking was your emphasis on values in the workplace and navigating conflict, and just navigating the workplace, and how there's the values and the mission of an organization, and then there's our own personal values, and how when you can hold both of those, that's where integrity and authenticity show up. And you use those two words, the integrity and then authenticity. And I love that, because to me, that is what integrity is: being able to stay true to our values while also holding space for others' values and finding a way to make that work. And I know when I have struggled the most in my life, it has been when I have foregone my values, maybe just to be completely in alignment with an organization, or completely in denial, or whatever it may be. And it has caused me personal challenge, but also it doesn't help the workplace either. So values, in addition to what you spoke to about values, for me, one other piece that came up initially just in reading the prompt at the beginning was vision yourself living your next day fully in your values. And to me, that seems like such a mindful exercise that isn't overly too much. And maybe it's, live your next morning or something, and maybe it's not a full day. But that really stood out to me, because I've done so many different values assessments and I haven't revisited them lately. And so it's a good chance to say, okay, what are my values? How can I reflect on those? Maybe my top 3 to 5 most, probably sticking more at 3. And then just be considerate of how that shows up for me tomorrow, and how I live my life, and what that looks like in the conversations that I have. And I think if those 3 value words, are at the front of my mind, I'm more likely then to root into, I keep using root. Oh my goodness, I need to stop. But I can root into that to keep in alignment in that way. Whereas I might just go about my other days more on autopilot, and not in as much of a mindful space. And if doing that for a day feels overwhelming, maybe it's even just taking a look at an email that you get tomorrow or one that's a little bit more challenging to respond to than something quite simple and sitting with that and saying, okay, what are my values? How can those show up here? And how can I respond in a way that's meaningful and filled with integrity, right? Because it takes my values into account and the other person's values. And I know values has had a lot of airtime, it seems like, in the self help world or in the corporate type world or, education. It's everywhere, right? What are your values and how does that relate? And then what are the organization's values and how does that relate? And I remember going through various values exercises, forming those for organizations, and how you would see people quite frustrated and annoyed with, yes, the process, but just like, why is this important? And there were different points where I felt that way as well. Like, why do we need to have so much emphasis on values? And if it's not values, maybe it's another word for values. And I don't have that in mind yet. But I think that there is something powerful and helpful about values that we can all point to that doesn't have to feel so much like this corporate training that we all are forced to go to kind of thing, but that is truly a way to meld the individual values and those needs with the larger world or larger organization.
One of the words that came up for me when you were saying maybe there's another word for values, and one thing I thought about is like maybe principles. They're the foundation of a belief system. One thing that came up for me when you were talking, Eryn, was how our values guide us. And I think that values are tied to meaning. For me, if I can, and I want to use your word, Eryn, even though you're like reluctant to use it, but I love the word root into. I can root into my values, and in rooting into my values, I have a sense of stability and I have a sense of purpose and I have a sense of meaning. So that's what aligning with my values does for me and can do for others. I want to go back to another line in the prompt. And actually, this is the second line. Actually, it's understanding was the third. But anyway, after the first line, the line rooting into your values can bring hope. When I was talking about principles, I was talking about meaning and purpose and intention, all of those things, and how it has shown up for me when I can return to my values, my principles, my philosophy, like my what I live by, and I know that I'm aligned with that, then it gives me hope because it's an indication that although things outside of my control or external factors around me may not be going exactly the way that I would like them to go, I know that I have the self-determination to live my life the way I want to live my life, and that nothing outside of me and no external factors are going to change the way I act or change the way that I perceive the world. That gives me hope because, and I want to then go back to the phrase, the life, so live the life you want and are designed to enjoy. So that brings me back to the mechanisms that are inherent in humans that allow us to appreciate and acknowledge and celebrate life and to design our own life. And it's not determined by what's happening outside of us. One of the things that I like to remind myself of when it's chaos, when people do things that you don't expect them to do, when people disappoint us, when people, do the things that people do, I go back to what did I do? What actions did I take? What words did I say? What thoughts did I think? And were they aligned with my values? Did I show up authentically? No matter what happens, no matter what the outcome, did I show up authentically? Did I respond to this? Did I make a decision based on love, appreciation, based on my values? And if I can say yes to those questions, then it's all good. Let's say I make a decision and the person who is maybe on the other end of that decision is upset, sad, disappointed, angry. I will recognize that, but I will also ask myself, was I honest with that person? Was I sincere? Was I deceiving? Was I trying to please them? And if I can answer yes to the former questions, was I honest? Was I sincere? Then that's great. I can separate the person's reaction to like how I feel about the outcome. And I feel like I'm not making myself clear, but that's essentially what I think of when I think about how important values are in my perception of a satisfying or satisfactory outcome, or my perception of success. Even if you didn't please people or people aren't like happy or whatever, if I made decisions based on my values and I showed up authentically with integrity, I'm good with that. So that's kind of something that's coming up for me. How about you, Erin?
Well, as I heard you talk through that, one of the things that I noticed is about showing up and how you're doing
Mm-hmm.
that like in the moment, which I think is really cool because it made me get a little uncomfortable in my own thinking and feel like I'm like, oh my goodness, when I show up, sometimes I am too pleasing or, and I know it's not this like pinpoint thing that can always show up in a certain way or there's always context but just you naming that and calling that piece out about how do we show up, that was a huge light bulb moment for me, especially since this is the action section, because that is one way that we can take action in our lives is simply how we show up and how we keep showing up, right? Because we aren't going to get our values aligned and our authenticity all perfectly wrapped up in a bow every time, and it's going to look different. But I think that intentionality that you so eloquently spoke to and that you talk about in the way that you show up with that honesty and integrity, I'm like, you need to train people in that. Shawn, that is to me like gold, because what does that look like for people who have very different values? And what does that look like when I'm interacting with a family member versus another individual? And at the end of the day, it shouldn't look that different. And yet there has to be, some level of deep understanding of our values to make sure that when we are showing up in those spaces that are so different, such as with family or in the workplace or wherever it is, or with whomever it is, that there's still that tethering to our values. It may look a little bit different, it may be finessed a little bit different, but that it is, a key part of how we show up. So I love you naming that and calling that out. And I think that in this section, it's so important to consider. So for people who are journaling, I think that is something to add into this space is, so then how do you show up individually and how does that match your values, and that's a way of taking action in itself. And so that really, really resonated with me. And then since this is in the action section, again, I started to kind of go down this rabbit hole. How do we popcorn, back and forth ideas with clients about, okay, how do I take action to live in my values? Well, it's like, well, first, how do you understand your values? How do you, really know what those are and where do you get those from? And sometimes it might be a deep dive into your history or into childhood or into values assessments that give more language and understanding. And it's like, okay, now that that is more clear, how have you noticed that show up for you in the past? Where were those values showing up for you in this specific conflict that you're struggling with? Or where are they showing up for you in this thing that's going well? And how do those two relate? How it's showing up when it's going well and how when there's conflict. Like there's so many coaching questions within values to just like jump off the deep end with, but then pull them back into action. Okay, now that there's that understanding, what do you want to do with your values in our conversation right now, right? Like, or what do you want to do with your values tomorrow morning when you wake up? Those sorts of things. And it doesn't have to be high pressure. I always love just like very small little shifts or noticings, even. Maybe it's simply getting into the practice of noticing values. And I think that for me, that's where I'm at personally. I was in that practice a lot more of okay, what are my values? How do those relate to me? How do I show up with those? And how am I using those and relying on those throughout the day and being authentic. And I haven't revisited that lately. So I think for me, it is about that noticing maybe over the next day or two, even just taking a brief inventory. What was my way of being today? What did I do? Especially when we're thinking about action, what was I doing throughout the day? How does that relate to my values? And these shift and these change. And I think, and for me, the hard part with that is they can look so different in the different seasons of life. And so that's what makes keeping our updated inventories on our values and having these conversations more often, I think, so important. And I think that might also be another reason as to why there's so talked about in the self-help space or talked about in coaching in the coaching space. When I did my first coach long training to become certified, that was one of the sections was specifically on values. And so they had devoted a whole, module to that. And I think that at the time I didn't recognize the value as much. Play on words there, I guess, of the value of the values. But having this conversation, and I think at this point in the journal, it really does flow nicely to take that moment to really draw those into how do you take action. And when we live in alignment with our values, I think there is that positive outcome in terms of some of the words that are throughout this prompt. Enjoy is one of them. And then at the last question, how do your values help you flourish? Right. These are meant to kind of be like strengths and help you flourish. And at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that it's a straight road with these. Values can make our lives challenging, right? When we have a mismatch of values with a friend or family member or whatever, there can be a little bit of a challenge when we talk about values in context in a relational system or setting. So those are some of the thoughts that are standing out to me this evening.
There's so much that's coming up for me, Eryn, as you were talking. One thing that stuck out for me the most was the idea of articulating our values. And that goes back in the prompt where it says, what are your top 3 to 5 values? And how important it is to write that down or to think about that. Because then I think that our values change. As we get more information, as we learn, as our life expands and contracts, our values change. Something that we may have valued in our 20s might not be as important when we're in our 30s, or something we valued in our 30s may not be as important in our 40s. For example, I think about how people pleasing was a real value for me. It was really, really important for me that everyone I was in contact with was happy and liked me. That was so important to me that I sacrificed my own integrity. I did things that I didn't want to do. I said things that were not, aligned with who I am, because my value in my 20s was belonging and getting along, going along to get along. And as I started to learn to value myself, to find my own self-worth, to ask the question, hey, what does LaShawn want? What is LaShawn like? What's good to LaShawn? When I started asking those questions in my late 30s, early 40s, people pleasing was no longer a value. As a matter of fact, I started to see it as a detriment. I started to see it as a vice, not a virtue. And really started to, yeah, because, when you're a people pleaser, there's that inner voice that kind of twists and distorts the people pleasing into a virtue. Like, oh, you're a good person because everybody likes you. They're pleased with you. You're meeting their needs and at the expense of your own, And as I started to really look within and ask myself, what is that black hole inside of my heart that can never get filled, and how do I fill it? It's not through pleasing others or, having people like me. It was, do I like me? Do I like myself? And once I shifted that once I shifted that priority in my late 30s, early 40s, that was no longer a value. And now my values are fairness, authenticity, congruence. That to me is what gives me meaning, fulfillment, and purpose. And I'm not so interested in whether or not people like me because I like me. And I know that people that I attract in my life, I don't have to do anything for them to like me. So that shifted how what I value and how I show up. So, Eryn, how about you? Have you seen any changes in your values through your life?
Oh, yes, big time. So, in my 20s, there was definitely a value of achievement, but how do I explain this? Like an achievement that would take on this like self-sacrificing role that wasn't necessary at all. And that was like unlearning a lot of different things. And then that people pleasing piece that was, I have always had that layered in at various points. And I still struggle with that for sure, I think, in some capacities. But going back to specifically my values, so I think my 20s, I had to grapple with that achievement piece. And 30s, it was like, how do am I finding myself in my grief? And really, I always valued authenticity as kind of a key part. But then I kind of would always mask that with a traditional, like achievement oriented, I have to take on this role and then I have to move up in this next level and then I have to keep moving up the ladder and like those sorts of things that are not necessarily in alignment with my values. So like when I sat down to really dig into my values more, it's like those things that I was living my life around, they were really not even my values then. They were these coping maybe strategies, trauma, all of those things, right? And so it had to be a lot of unlearning and unwinding to get to where I am. And I still like, I think writing my book that in 2025, that was a healing thing for me a lot because it helped me kind of see through lines and threads in my own life that I had noticed, but didn't fully integrate or fully understand. And now I do. And I think that that's been really helpful. And so that has shifted my values now moving forward. And it's not just that writing project, but creativity, right? That was blooming in the writing project, and creativity is a key value of mine that I get to live out more. And I think another key value of mine that I'm definitely living out more is compassion and collaboration. And those are two values that aren't necessarily always, they don't always align with achievement, right? And so looking back on like this huge shift in a way, it's like I'm still me, but my values have shifted and my purpose, I'm much more understanding of my purpose and the work that I do and that I get to do. And and it doesn't have to be from an external reason, but very much more of like this deep meaningful work that I want to do and the interest that I have in that. And I've always deeply valued relationships, and I think that has been another through line. Like I think that that might be one of the things that hasn't shifted too much. But anyway, I could go on, I think, on so many. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to sit with these values again. A good reason for this exercise. But even just like what's interesting, just going back home to visit extended family, and seeing, each year in adulthood, when I would do that, I would see how my values have changed a little bit and shifted, and how they're a little bit different maybe than other family members or what I thought they were. And then like having that perspective up close of being in that space where my values were formed and seeing them, like, oh my goodness, I have a different value here. Wow. Like it's always that feeling of both the awe and wonder of my personal journey, and like how that has led me to be who I am, and the gratitude I have for that, but also the like, is there something wrong with me? Like, is there something, like that? There's still that second guessing, right? Like, oh, am I not taking things seriously enough right now? Or, like there's just like still that insecurity that'll show up with these values too. So yeah, I I think I rambled a lot there about values.
The
I'm like, what am I just saying? But
no, it I love the exercise that has unfolded in the discussion of this prompt. It's a real deep dive into what makes us tick. It's a really deep dive into self-discovery, self-awareness. I think that's one of the reasons why in coaching, my coaching training involved a course on values as well. I think it's integral to coaching training because our values, that's the information, that's kind of like the blueprint of our clients, is a blueprint of ourselves. How do we see the world and what is important to us? And that's dynamic, that's always shifting with how we grow and what we experience. So as you were talking, Eryn, one of the things that really came out for me was just how this is an exploration of the self. And it's also leads, and like I said at the beginning, where this journal itself is a journey of, inspiration. It's a journey of exploration and also action. And how those kind of they lead into each other. There's like when you're inspired, you get curious, you want to know more, you want to know how you show up, you start to really look at your way of being and how you show up in life. And then as you start to reflect on that and look at that and process that, there's this, I feel impelled to act a certain way. And the more that I talk about my values and we talk about values, my thoughts turn to, how am I showing up and how do I want to show up? And that showing up involves action, it involves thought and speech. And it brings me to the idea of flourishing, which is also part of this guided journal. The last section is flourish. And I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe this is the first time that flourish has shown up in the journal. It may have shown up earlier, but I can't remember other prompts that had the word flourish in it. So it's really interesting that flourish is coming up as we're getting closer to the section that is flourish. And the word flourish brings me to the idea of being designed to enjoy life. If we are aligned with that part of ourselves that wants things in a certain way, or that wants to have meaning and purpose and fulfillment, then we flourish. So I think values and aligning with our values and understanding what our values are, really articulating them and writing them down, making that list of 3 to 5 top values will help us course correct or assess, are we on the right path? That goes to the idea of what do you want to change about how you spend your time and or how you show up authentically to live out your values. So then again, you're asking those questions. It's a coaching question, how am I showing up? Am I showing up in a way that feels aligned with the life that I want? And again, back to the life you are designed to enjoy. So there's so much in this prompt that there's so many ways that one can direct their thinking and their reflection. It's such a rich and robust prompt. So many things are coming up in this and how it can lead to a deeper understanding and a more aligned way of being in our lives. And even if, we feel like authentic and all of those things, it's a way of celebrating that and recognizing that and acknowledging that and doing more of the same. What are your thoughts, Eryn?
It just like was closing my eyes and listening. And it just, I don't know. I feel like I could just hear your values in the tone of your voice and how you were talking. So it was just kind of this moment for me where it's just kind of a pleasant space that felt quite relaxing, actually. So that's a tangent. I think I'm getting to the end of this now, and I'm like going on all these different tangents right now. And I'm like, okay, bring it back in, bring it back in here. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm ready for a call to action.
Yeah.
And I guess something that's coming up for me with values and a call to action is maybe even taking a first step back and just sitting with that word value or the word values and what comes up for you. Is there a sense of annoyance? Is there a sense of fear? Is there a sense of openness? Because we all have different histories with this word. And I know from my observations in the workplace, there was a lot of eye rolling around this word, So, so sit with the word and really interrogate what's coming up for you and why, and see how that shows up for you in your day so that you can take action in it moving forward.
Yeah, mine is similar to yours, Eryn. Just sitting with the word value. I'm going to just go ditto on the what are your top 3 to 5 values. So as you sit with that word value and are ready and feel comfortable and it feels aligned to do so, go ahead and write down that 3 to 5 values and sit with those values. What does that look like? What does each value look like? How does it show up in your life? What are the feelings that are associated with those values? And where are some examples of that value that you see in media, in books, and stories, and in movies or TV shows? So play with those 3 to 5 values, sit with them, get curious about them, and explore. Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm L Shawn with Michelle Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.